Also, tidbit information: the reason that bees calm down when we smoke them is because they believe their hive is on fire.
Interesting.
If that is not the most zen approach I have ever heard to a situation, yeah, we make the bees think their hive is on fire, so they calm down.
Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and in today's episode, we're talking all about the future of agriculture. And what I mean by that is some new, developments in agriculture, both technological and just in terms of nature development itself, and how that's going to affect our future food production. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about bees and lab-grown meat. So here with us to discuss this topic is my guest, KT. I'm going to let this person go ahead and introduce themselves. So take it away.
Hello, I am KT. I run my own podcast. It's called the Utopic Socialist. First episode is launching on Wednesday. You can find it wherever you can podcast. And if you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter at Proto-Socialist. But yes, I'm really excited to get to talk about two of my favorite things, which is meat and bees today.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm very excited for it as well. And this is definitely a topic that I'm not fully. I haven't talked about a whole lot on the podcast. So it's not something I'm fully in the right mindset for, but I'm ready for it regardless. And I think it'll be a really interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So just jumping straight into it, before we start with the discussion, what, if any, background do you have with agriculture?
Well, I did grow up in Western Kentucky, so a lot of tobacco, soy, corn, cattle, that sort of thing is what I'm very used to. And I have been to an apiary and got to see that as well. So, I mean, I've been around agriculture. My family wasn't farming by the time I got around there, but I've been around livestock and plants and all that throughout my entire life.
Awesome. Well, that, sounds like you got a decent amount of exposure. You got just a general feel for it. You kind of know how things go on the farm.
Yeah, exactly. Right outside my window, I can look at a soy field, and then just beyond that is the Ohio River.
Cool.
So it's something I see every day. It sure can get annoying though when you're driving and it's fall and there is just every single tractor on the road possible.
Oh, I
and they're
imagine.
going 20 miles an hour.
Yeah, no, it's the downside of harvest season. You're just never gonna get anywhere on time.
Oh yeah, geez. And then they come out with so they always have that flagger truck rolling through there, and then there's just this sprayer that comes through, so you got to dive your sedan off into the ditch, basically.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've definitely been there. I've had my complications with road traffic because of tractors, and whether it's sprayers or delivery trucks or whatever it is, they have a way of getting in the way.
Yeah, they do. But hey,
Awesome.
it's better, it's good that they run anyway. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, no,
Mhm.
exactly. It's just like, I don't know if you've heard the song International Harvester, but it's, in the song, he talks about like, hey, I got to make my living too. I'm trying to grow your food. So you might as well just, wave high and just wait your turn. And that's,
Yeah.
it's about all you can do.
Yeah, it is. And so, yeah, I definitely can get behind that.
Yeah. Awesome. So diving into our topic of discussion, bees. So why don't you fill me in a little bit on what your experience, knowledge, kind of expertise is in bees and beekeeping.
Well, it's not necessarily an expertise, and so I just wanted to get on here, and discuss it. So I study economics is my field of interest, but it's like a hobby of mine, as I do enjoy looking into bees and just seeing the impact they have, and as well also the fact that with the Varroa populations that we're having going on in the U.S. and the rise of colony collapse disorder, I wonder if we're going to see bees become less and less viable, or if the struggle that we're going to get through is going to get to a point where we can have basically an explosion of bees, and then every bit of acreage is going to have a bee or an apiary on it. in every acre just to boost that productivity. I'm really interested in talking about where you think that's going to go in terms of the future. Just more bees, less bees, same amount of bees. It's sort of the main thing.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. So I mean, it's really interesting conversation. The only discussion on the show I've had about bees is just people asking like, are the bees okay? Do we still need to be careful about them? I'm like, the bees are fine. The
The bees
population
are
of the bees,
livestock.
yeah, the bees are
Yeah,
doing just fine.
yeah,
um,
yeah. It's like
but
horses.
right.
We can make more bees. Yeah, I get
Right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. And like, there's always people worried about the bees going extinct. I mean, I think that if one thing's not going to go extinct, it's going to be bees. Like, I think we're doing pretty okay. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but in terms of their viability, now that's a different kind of conversation.
It is entirely.
I have seen. I was doing some research before the episode on kind of not just the bee population, but like you mentioned, the viability of bees in the future of agriculture. And the USDA seems to think that bees are going to be replaced pretty soon. In terms of we're going to develop technology and newer methods of production that might involve some genetic modification or some more efficient ways of of either crossbreeding plants or just developing new genetic technology for crop production that's not even going to require pollination anymore. So we might get to a point eventually that could, like, I don't think we're ever going to be to a point where we're not going to need bees at all. But I think that the use of bees may see a decrease, fairly soon.
Yeah.
I personally don't see an increase of bees being something that's going to be necessary in the modern automated agriculture age we're living in.
Yeah, that is one thing that, especially I know that Wageningen, I believe it is, in the Netherlands, has a fully automated field.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they fully automated it. Everything was computerized and droned, and it basically ran a full harvest.
Hmm.
And that is one thing because, I know we don't need the bees to go out and pollinate these plants. We have dozens of natural pollinators, but it is interesting, because it does generate additional income. If these beekeepers, especially in these areas, can get over there, because it does boost the product somewhat. But additionally, we create honey, bee pollen, beeswax, and all these other very good products. And just because bees are producing products that we have to produce out of oil mostly, and are worse.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And that's part of the conversation that's often left out, when people worry about the survival of the bees and, the risk of losing our bee population. We do have other pollinators. There's plenty of other insects and small animals that can serve the same purpose as bees. I mean, even for a long time, before agriculture became really prominent, humans were doing that job.
Yeah.
It's
And
something.
yeah, and also like there's other animals that make honey, other insects.
Right, exactly. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that we necessarily just need bees anymore. I mean, not gonna say we should get rid of them today, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think that we've kind of over exaggerated how prevalent bees are, or how prevalent they need to be in modern agriculture. And I think the bees are doing a great thing. I think that
Mm-hmm.
what we've been able to accomplish with with bees has been awesome. But I think that especially as we develop our technology even further, we're starting to get to a point now where we can kind of just do their job,
Yeah, yeah, I definitely see what you're talking about.
yeah,
Definitely.
with
And one part of
supplemental,
it though is we do use the word bee in terms of like we need to save the bees,
right,
but that's like it's a very loose term because there's thousands of different species of bees.
right,
I'm
yeah,
exaggerating probably. I actually don't know how many bees there are, but yeah, there's dozens and dozens of bees, ones that are local to the US and come from all abroad in
hmm,
terms of the ones, and not all bees are honeybees. Yeah.
right, yeah, and that's the big thing too. People worry about, like, I think I read somewhere that honeybees aren't even actually native to North America. Like,
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
we
Most of our queens are Russian queens, I believe. Russians
right.
and Italians is where we get most of our queens from.
Okay. Huh. So, which is
Yeah.
interesting, because that's something that is often like, we had the whole, I don't know if you remember at the beginning of, I'm sure you do, at the beginning of 2020, we had the whole killer hornet situation.
Yeah.
Was it
Yeah.
killer hornet or,
Yeah. It was a killer hornets or wasps.
yeah,
Yeah, I forget which. And then a couple years before then, we had Africanized bees as well.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that was a concern. Like the, the general public, I actually got this question a couple times on the podcast. The general public was concerned for the safety of the bees because of this, this one predatory insect. And they didn't even really realize exactly how bees are kept, exactly how like the how hives are maintained, how the how
Hmm.
bees are used in, like you mentioned, in terms of livestock, not just natural bees, but the bees that we actually utilize for agricultural use, and how those are maintained. And so
Yeah.
while I'm sure that those predatory species are dangerous for certain beekeepers and for certain farmers, I'm not sure that, because like you said, the whole like the general how general it is when we say like save the bees. I'm not sure just how much of an issue it really was that we have an invasive species that's preying
Hmm. Yeah,
on
exactly. I mean, I think we should be much more worried about the varroa mite, and even then, when we talk about like these bees coming up here, I mean, commercial growers have to be worried about their bees invading other hives.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because that was something I was very interested to learn about. Yeah, a bee can just a queen can just say, yeah, go ahead and raid that other hive for their stuff.
Right.
Yeah, it's like SEAL Team Buzz.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
that's just, it's funny to think about, because like you don't, like, people tend to not like, I don't know why, but we've forgotten that bees are animals, so they have natural instinct that they can do things. They're not just like robots, so we can just send out there and do whatever we want. Like, they have their own
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
their own mode of living, and they don't even, they're not in it for us, they're in it for them, so they're going to behave in ways that may not even completely align with what we want them to do, but that's just kind of, that's just, they're going to do what they're going to do. I mean, you can't really control
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
no, that it's funny, it's funny that you bring up the whole raiding hive kind of situation. um so I'm kind of curious on your take on this. I know that for a long time, and this still might be the case, but there was a big issue with like beekeepers suing PCAs, because they were not, maybe it wasn't necessarily PCAs, but like crop dusters,
Yeah, yeah.
like
Due to
there's,
CCD, yeah, colony collapse
yes,
disorder.
right. um
Yeah,
do
yeah.
you
I'm not aware of any direct links between that, but we can look at graphs and say, okay, there is CCD or colony collapse disorder, where basically all the bees will leave a hive
mhm,
and the colony will collapse, and the bees will go locate themselves somewhere else, and the rise with commercial agriculture and industrial agriculture. The issue with this, though, I mean, I don't know if there's a direct link specifically, and we all know a correlation does not equal causation.
right.
So yeah, definitely, I think, and again, colony collapse disorder doesn't mean the bees are just dying. The bees are moving.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's definitely, it's all about context, right? Like, just because something is happening doesn't mean that it's like it's exactly like you said, causation doesn't equal, or correlation doesn't equal causation, just
Exactly,
because,
exactly.
yeah, just because B is happening doesn't mean that A is happening.
Yeah.
The A is causing it necessarily.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it'd be the same as if horses were just more likely to run off of farms. The only
right.
issue is when a horse runs away from a farm, oh, one horse got away, no one cares. A million bees left? Oh no. Like
Yeah,
there's just one hive's worth. It's not that many bees.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's all, all gets put down to context, and that's just not something that tends to cross people's minds. But
Yeah, yeah.
the
And
point
then I
was,
wonder if anybody's out there with conspiracy theories, because at this time of year in North America, all the bees are dying because
oh
it's
yeah,
that time. It's that time of year. All the females force all the males out.
oh yeah. No, I've
Yeah.
I've had some interesting conversations. Luckily, and where I shouldn't say luckily, but not on the show. I just had people kind of ask me in person before,
Mhm.
of like around this time, they're like, "Hey, I've been seeing a lot of dead bees on the ground. Are they like overspraying or something?" It's like, no, this is kind of just what happens. This is
Yeah.
natural.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
The bees aren't like a commune. It's not like free love and peace. Everybody's welcome.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
They're creatures refined for survival through, generations and generations.
Right. Well, it's
Yeah.
always funny because people like to describe this almost like a war between the Green Revolution, chemical agriculture, and natural agriculture. They like to say like, oh yeah, is the reason all the bees are dying is because everyone's just spraying too many pesticides, or the reason that the bees
Yeah.
are dying is because, or like, you know they
Hmm.
seem to think that all of the bees are collectively one unit, and that it's just like some big company is just constantly spraying them with enough chemicals to kill them off. I'm sure it's happening.
Yeah.
I actually know
Yeah,
it's
I
happening.
mean, Yeah,
But
wild pollinators are at risk. Yeah, there are certain
right,
wild pollinators at risk, and work should be done to do those. But you don't help wild pollinators by buying a Russian queen and then putting it up in your backyard. In fact, you have just made the situation worse.
right, yeah, no,
Yeah, like you just did the opposite of what you're supposed to do.
right, yeah. Commercial beekeeping is definitely by no means, and I'm not gonna say environmentally friendly, but it's by no means, naturally preserving the order of
Hmm.
things. It's just not
Yeah,
like
I
it's
mean,
not to be
it's
thought of.
better than it's better than like lives like cattle. It's very environmentally friendly compared to other forms of
Sure,
agriculture, but there's not zero impact.
right,
There's
exactly.
always a cost.
Right. And well, the funny thing about it is, like we're talking about with, like you can have hives
Hmm.
raid each other and you can have, that kind of stuff happen. Like the war on bees that everyone keeps talking about is almost ironic because the bees are having wars on themselves that nobody's even talking about.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just dependent upon how mean the queen is. Yeah, it's
Right.
very interesting. Bees just respond to her exclusively. But
Right.
yeah, tracking back to something you said before, talk about spraying and GMOs.
Hmm.
It is kind of sad that in this current time those have become a block. If you want GMOs or spraying, you have to have them both, and you either want them or you don't want them.
Hmm.
So, the thing that would prevent us from needing to spray agriculture, we can't do because the people who don't like spraying don't like GMOs.
Right. No, exactly. And that's something I've had to
Yeah.
talk about before too, is, that every time we lump those two together, we're having a counterproductive conversation. Like I've had people say before, like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
the problem with agriculture today is that they're spraying too much and they're using too many GMOs. It's like, well, if you let us use one, we wouldn't have to use the other. But that's kind of they're not ready to
Yeah,
have that
yeah.
conversation. But I mean,
Mm-mm.
so I'm like I said, I'm not the most knowledgeable in terms of bees, so I'm going to be asking you uh, more questions on that kind of stuff. In terms of like the GMO conversation,
Mhm.
it's like let's just say we have a crop that's more herbicide and pesticide resistant, and so or maybe it's got built-in pesticides so we don't have to spray it as much.
Yeah.
If a if a bee cross pollinates that crop, or if a bee is trying to
Mm.
pollinate, like, or first of all, let's before we even get there, are there regulations on how you're able to pollinate fields that are genetically modified, or can you pollinate fields that are genetically modified right now?
I don't think there's any restrictions on that. I mean,
Okay,
it's pretty hard to tell a bee what to do and
right,
where to go get
that's
its
fair.
pollen from. And so, yeah, depending upon what's in the area, a lot of commercial beekeepers locate themselves on federal land.
Hmm.
So they locate themselves on federal land where it's protected, and only a few types of growing is allowed,
Okay.
and a few types of non-intensive agriculture like cranberries and other forms of berries and bees, and then a few others are just big commercial plots of forest land where they plant a lot of flowers. But in terms of like your local honey, especially in rural areas in which you go buy local honey, which is it's local honey, not unpasteurized local honey is amazing for your health.
Hmm.
And I'm not one of those essential oils, take this frankincense, cure your cancer.
Right.
No, no, it helps with allergies and the
Yes.
like. Yeah, it helps with allergies. Don't stop with your chemo if you take local honey.
Right.
But yeah, so anyways, I don't know anything about that specifically, and I don't think it would be something you'd be able to police just
Mhm.
because bees don't care. But I do know that in terms of where they're putting bees, there's just been this big push recently to put bees in the big cities,
No.
Los Angeles, New York, and all the other ones just across the U.S. are trying to get the bees in there.
Now, what's the primary reason for that?
Well, people are finding that the bees are able to somewhat propagate. I mean, there's small parks and avenues in these areas, and so there are beekeepers who are able to do so, and then they market it as high premium honey and are able to make a decent living off of it.
Okay,
And
I see.
additionally, other people are finding out how easy it is to raise bees because getting stung by a bee sucks, but you don't get stung that often if you don't attack them, and it's very dependent upon the queen. And
Right.
as well in the suburbs, people are working on it. There's a lot of little startups and initiatives that are trying to get beekeeping in local arms much more.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, that's just something that's going on now. Is definitely because bees, if you think about it, it's a box that you can set outside, and the
Right.
bees will go take care of themselves. I mean, you have to do work, but it's a lot easier than if you were to, start raising 50 head of cattle.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Huh.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
this is kind of a goofier question, but I come from a cattle based background, so I'm more familiar with beef and dairy cattle mostly. With
Hmm.
cattle, and this is more prevalent in horses, but especially like with cattle, you can almost determine how they're going to act. You can determine their behavior if you spend long enough with them. Can you do that with bees? Like, have you
Yes.
gotten?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all dependent upon the queen.
Okay.
Yeah, however mean the queen is however mean the bees will be. Your bees could be super nice. I know beekeepers who don't even wear their suits when
Wow.
they go mess with their bees. They just walk out there, they got their smoker.
Hmm.
Also, tidbit information. The reason that bees calm down when we smoke them is because they believe their hive is on fire.
Interesting.
If that is not the most zen approach I have ever heard to a situation, yeah, we make the bees think their hive is on fire so they calm down.
They just give up, or why?
That
Why
is
do
the
they?
most. I have no idea. I haven't looked into the bee psychology of it, but that is why they calm down,
That's
is because
crazy.
they think the
Huh.
bees are on fire.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Well, it reminds me.
but
Have you seen
yeah,
that meme where it's like the dog sitting at the coffee table and his house is on fire and he's just like,
yeah,
"It's fine."
yeah. That's bees. That's straight up as bees.
That's awesome.
This is fine. Yeah, yeah. So just a neat thing about it. But yeah, so it's all dependent upon the queen.
Huh.
If the bees are mean, the bees are mean, and
Hmm.
the bees don't want to sting you because they don't
Yeah,
like it.
then they'll die.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's actually one thing is just, it's kind of a myth that if bees sting something, they die. If bees sting people, they die because we have thick skin. So
Okay.
their tails are really barbarous.
Hmm.
Their tails are basically barbed wire.
Oh. Huh.
So yeah, if you were to stick a barbed wire poker into something that was pretty thin and squishy, it's going to pull right back out like another insect
Hmm.
and do more damage to it. But when it's a human, we have really thick skin, so they can get it in there, but they can't get it back out, and they rip that tail out of themselves.
Okay. Interesting. Well,
Hmm.
I knew that I knew that whenever they sting a human, obviously it rips their stinger out, and that's like connected to like all their their organs and everything, and that kind of rips them apart. But I didn't know that they could just sting like a non-human and still be okay.
Yeah, it depends upon how thick the skin is, and so
Huh.
you have to think bees are designed to fight other insects.
Right. Yeah, they're soldiers essentially.
Yeah, yeah. So bees will fight and protect the hive against other bees and wasps and other things that will try to
Hmm.
and invade them, and so that's what they're designed to fight up against is all of that. So yeah.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Wow. So can you kind of, if you're taking care of like a hive, can you get to be on better terms with the queen? Like, can you improve your relationship with the queen and she won't send her bees on you?
Sort of. It just really depends upon and how it goes. Some queens are just mean, and in
Yeah.
fact, sometimes you can put a queen in a hive, and the bees won't like her, and they won't take to her, and they'll let her starve.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Bees have a very intense social structure.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Also, if you're managing a hive, you have to be very careful because if you go around digging in a box and you don't check if they're making royal jelly, they will make royal jelly, make another queen, and then they will force the old queen to take half the hive and leave.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So bees manage themselves. Like if your hive is getting overpopulated, the bees will leave your hive and go elsewhere.
So how do you, like, from the managerial perspective, how do you handle that? Like, do you just let it happen, or do you have to break up, their, like, if they're trying to make
Uh,
royal jelly, do you just have to stop them, or?
you can make another hive yourself,
Okay.
and you can move half the hive over with a new queen. But yeah, you have to go in there and you have to break off the royal jelly to make sure they don't make another queen, or you can, take care of that. And so that's basically how bees are. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah. And also, if you kill one bee, it releases pheromones,
Mm-hmm.
which tells every other bee that a bee has died, which is a bad thing to bees. So the bees will then not be happy with whoever has that pheromone on them.
Makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. There is one perfume or something out there that I forget, but some people claim that it smells like that chemical to the bees, and so they'll attack you. I'm not certain on that, and So you all use the Google machine. Go ahead and fire up them diesel computers and see if they work, uh, and see if that's true. But that is something I've heard in the past.
That sounds like a fun, like almost like a prank. Like you should like spray somebody with that, and then have them come to your, come to your hives, and then they just get bombarded.
Yeah. Aside from the potentiality of death, that does kind of put a damper.
That's
a
true.
damper on that kind of prank. Yeah,
that could be a bit of an issue. Well, you
yeah,
just don't put enough on there that they'll be killed.
yeah, definitely.
Wow. So I mean, that's probably one of the most complex social structures in a livestock animal that I've ever heard of.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're allowed to have it. Is one thing.
Mm.
When it comes to like horses and cattle and everything, we break that out of them.
Right, that's true.
I mean, like that's one of the things I'm sure you know about it. When you have to break a horse, it's really hard to break a bee. You can't exactly hook it up to the sled.
That's fair. I mean,
yeah. So we haven't found a way to break their social structure, because if we could, we sure would have engineered that a long time ago.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's also it's a little bit difficult because they have power in numbers at that point. Like if you break up their social structure, then that could potentially break up their entire production. And then you just kind of lose out your lose out your entire operation there. Like with that's assuming that you even could. With cattle, you break up their social structure, they'll still make the same product for you. Just might you might have to. They'll have like with cattle, they still have a social structure. It's just different than how it would appear naturally. Like their social structure is just they have a top cow, and the top cow just gets to eat first. Basically, that's about the extent of it.
Yeah, and then every spring, you get that awful bawling for just yeah, because all the calves are gone. They'll just murr for hours, and you're trying to sleep. You just hear that through the walls.
Oh, I can imagine. That's got to be nice about the bees, though. They probably don't make I know they don't make as much noise, but they're probably not obnoxious in terms of the noise.
Yeah, it is. And I guess, we did just take their children from them. So, we could give them a little bit of sympathy.
Fair.
Yeah. A little bit of sympathy, not too much.
No, you gotta give them a little bit of slack, but don't let them get used to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. But one thing I do want to talk about is Varroa.
Gorilla?
Varroa.
Okay.
Yeah, VORRA. It's a mite.
Okay. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, so it's a little mite that attaches to bees and then it eats them, and it's become a big issue over here in North America. And so beekeepers are having a lot of trouble dealing with the mite and trying to get it off of them, because if you get a hive that's infected with these, and we don't actually fully understand how they're able to get onto bees. Research is still being done into that. There are places in the world which are Varroa free. There's one island up in Canada, I forget exactly where, they're Varroa free as of I last heard. But that is one issue is, across the world, since the 90s, we've had Varroa that have moved in here, and it is a problem, and is a sort of an epidemic in beekeeping. It's a lot more important to beekeepers than CCD is really, it's effectively like, imagine so the size comparison is, imagine if you had a coyote that just attached itself to the back of every cow you had.
Wow. So it's
it gets bad, and it will wreck a hive.
Oh wow, that's crazy. Yeah.
Because the bees come in the hive, the bees go around other bees, the mites jump off the other bees, they start eating those, and then they can just work through the entire structure of a hive. Yeah.
Is there currently any like effective preventative measures you can take with them?
Yeah, I know they're using fire.
Oh wow.
yeah they're using fire as a good method to get rid of the varroa mites. The problem is that it has the side effect of getting rid of the hive as well.
I was gonna say that probably doesn't sound too productive for the bees.
Yeah, but they were calm during it, remember?
That's true. Yeah, they're just sitting back and watching it happen.
Yeah. So that is a big problem facing the beekeeping, and it's been an issue for 30 years now. But it gets there are years worse than others, and it's getting worse now. So there needs to be some effort done in terms of getting that taken care of, and a lot of it is education. It's kind of interesting to learn about. They're all over. There's beekeeping associations or organizations just like all over the U.S. especially, and you can get information about beekeeping, meet other beekeepers. It's just learn how to be a beekeeper. It's a really accessible form of it's a really accessible hobby, or form of light agriculture that many
Hmm.
people can practice. I was surprised to learn about.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I really had never taken an interest in bees besides just the whole, like population and cross pollination kind of stuff. But yeah, no, it definitely sounds like it's a lot more intricate and and interesting than what it gives off to be.
Yeah, there's a big expression, that you don't work the bees, you work with the bees.
Huh. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, with a cow, you run it through a chute, you put it in an area, you hook up the machine to it, you draw the milk off of it, you put it over here. You work cattle. You
Hmm.
have to work with the bees. You can't work them the same way you can other livestock, and so that's where it becomes an issue. And so, people also want to claim that like all beekeepers have the same kind of personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I assume that's because they were too forceful one day and they cracked open the hive, and then they learned to be a little more patient.
Yeah, that
Because
sounds
if
about
you,
right.
yeah, you piss that queen off, and she gonna get upset with you.
Well, yeah, you can't mess with the well unless you let her on fire, then I guess then she'll be fine. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Even then, so if you don't have enough smoke in there or anything like that, and also, so you have to pull out all these little racks in there. If you squish a bee, they'll be mad at you.
well, I would
So,
imagine. I mean, if you came in and squished one of my family members, I'd probably be a little upset.
yeah, yeah. So bees are a very interesting thing that we have to deal with, and
So,
so that yeah.
so I have a couple questions. First of all, going back to the whole squishing bees thing, you said that whenever a bee dies, it gives off pheromones that can upset other bees. Is that only if they die through unnatural means, or if they just die just from natural ways too? Will they also get
Squishing,
upset?
squishing them
Okay,
is mostly when it comes to it. Is that's what does it when we squish bees and other things. I'm not certain if attacks do it as well, just like piercing them.
hmm,
I believe it's something to do with their insides that can do it. But yeah,
that
when they
makes sense.
force bees outside and they drop dead through freezing or whatever it is, that doesn't alert the bees. They're
Okay,
not going to go outside and attack the cold. Uh,
okay, that would be interesting to watch.
yeah,
But okay, so it's almost like there's like a just like looking at it like an image, like a bag of just hormones sitting inside them. Whenever you smash them, it just releases all of it because the bag pops or whatever.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure I assume you've gone deer hunting and you've
Hmm.
had to deal with the urine sac in a deer.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that is always a fun experience, and you always hope, oh please don't bust, please don't bust, please don't
Right.
bust.
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. And then the other
Mhm.
question I had was, so going back to your whole Varroa situation, would it be possible? Because I know we haven't really done this a whole lot with livestock yet. But would it be possible to genetically modify bees to be able to handle that kind of parasite better?
Mhm. Well, go back to the coyote on the back of your cattle
Hmm.
analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would have to find a way to engineer them some maybe some spikes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's definitely is. It's something we need to look into, and mostly we just need to get rid of the infection. But the
Hmm.
issue is it's also in our environment as well,
Okay.
and so there's going to be a lot of work to do it. And I don't have the answers in terms of what we need to do or what we can do.
Right.
What I do know is that we can do something. At least we. So that's one thing we need to talk about is when we deal with this situation, if every commercial hive was able to make their populations 100% varroa free,
Hmm.
that would not solve the problem in our
Okay.
environment. Yeah,
Huh.
our environment is, so like, yeah, our natural pollinators are having to fight off varroa, which is hard,
Right.
and they're having issues with it. And so we need to find a way to kill the varroa mite specifically. But I don't know if that's going to be a battle we can wage with the technology we have.
Right. Yeah. There's
Hmm
not really. I mean,
Even
unless
if we
we.
could,
I was
yeah,
gonna say,
I
unless we could
said,
find a way to like almost, just give the varroa mite, some kind of disease and it brings it back and just kills all the other ones. But I'm not even sure if that would be a sufficient solution.
yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. The varroa mites will go on to the bees and then multiply from there. I mean,
Right.
even if we developed a pesticide which could 100% kill varroa mites, do you think that we're going to allow crop dusters to just start crisscrossing the nation, spraying everybody and everything?
Oh yeah. No. No way.
Yeah, that's not happening. That would, yeah. Every conspiracy theory nut job out there would have would have a box of tools to play with, and
Oh yeah,
every one of it. Yeah,
that would just do nothing but fuel his fire. So
yeah. So they're not going to start crop dusting for Varroa. It's not real. In case anybody was, that's not a real thing.
so do you
If it
think
was, I'd support it.
right? So you mentioned that it's an issue of education. Do you think if we were able to get people more aware of the situation, they'd be more comfortable with us developing technology that could handle that kind of problem, or is it deeper than that?
Yeah. Well, it's an education for beekeepers,
Hmm.
to be able to handle the Varroa situation.
Okay.
The issue when it comes to the general public and what they're concerned with, because in all honesty, the general public should not care about honeybees.
Right.
It's a livestock issue. I mean, I'm not saying like you shouldn't learn about it, but I'm saying like, if you're sitting in your house and you're concerned about the honeybees, their livestock, the beekeepers are going to be able to handle this. It's about educating the beekeepers, but in terms of like the our natural pollinators, our natural environment dealing with Varroa, that's where we're going to see the issue.
Mm,
And I'm not certain how we could help in terms of developing measures in order to fight back the Varroa mite in our environment. The bees are important, but they're not alone.
right. That's fair. Um.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So, I mean, I'm not sure if there was anything in particular else about the bees or the future of beekeeping
Hmm.
that you wanted to discuss. Those are kind of all the questions I could think of on that topic.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, that's good. If you want to go ahead and switch over, and we've been talking about cattle for quite a while. Let's talk about making cattle obsolete. Just as we mentioned in the beginning, how bees are obsolete. Woo, technology and humans.
Yep. No, that this entire episode is just about how agriculture is just going to get rid of all the animals and just find better ways to do it.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely. Yeah, it's planned obsolescence, ag style.
right. Exactly. Okay. So lab grown meat. What do you know about it?
Lab-grown meat or synthetic meat or any form they're talking about, they use pluripotent stem cells gathered from animal muscles in order to develop and grow meat in petri dishes. The main company just is pushing for it, has actually received regulatory approval in the 6 million person nation of Singapore.
Hmm.
Although it is excessively expensive, it is more environmentally friendly in terms of greenhouse gas, energy intensiveness, land use, and the belief is that as the material is going forth, we can get the meat, we can get the price per pound to drop precipitously,
Hmm.
and so that is something that I'm really interested in, the ability for us to make meat cheaper, cleaner, and healthier.
Interesting. So I
Hmm.
I was let's see, I was in high school when the lab grown meat first started to kind of circulate the conversations.
Hmm.
And so at that point they had it wasn't even out of the lab yet, like because it's a very
Yeah.
recent thing that it's even available for purchase.
Exactly, and it's hella expensive.
Yes.
One chicken nugget costs like 30 pounds,
Right. No, exactly.
or
So yeah,
30 US dollars. So
yeah.
it's not cheap in any measure. It's cheaper than when it first came out, but
Mhm.
we're a ways away from getting cheap agriculture. That
Right.
could be next week. We could hear about the massive breakthrough that makes it pennies on the dollar. It
Mhm.
could be the next decade. That's one of the things that we don't know about when it's going to come. But I want to talk about exactly when it's coming. Regardless, what do you think will happen when we start seeing it, when it becomes competitive in terms of price? Because I do know that there's been some recent studies, market-based studies, that have shown that people are willing to pay a premium for this product. I mean, think about your vegans, your vegetarians, or your animal rights activists, the people who are concerned about that,
Oh
who
yeah.
see these products as because there's no animal pain involved in this.
Right.
It'd be the same thing as giving the animal a vaccination.
Right.
uh and so that's just
So
something I was go ahead.
yeah. So okay. So yeah, like I said, this is something that I've taken an interest in a lot lately, just because like I said, I come from the beef and dairy industry, so this is something that would heavily affect my hometown and my family and that kind of stuff. It's something that I think is really it's a conversation that's worth having now before it starts to evolve more and more. Um, it's hard to say when it's going to reach that level. The question I've always had about it is not necessarily when is it going to become commercially competitive. Is my question has been is it is it going to reach a point where it'll be sustainable enough to replace conventional agriculture?
Yeah, and that's gonna be something to talk about. I mean, in terms of production, it's infinitely scalable.
Mm-hmm.
That's one
Right.
thing that you can think about. It's not perfect yet, and it's replication.
Right.
We can't replicate the exact same flavor and taste, but what we can do is we can produce any cut of meat,
Mm. Which is
and
impressive.
that's something we can think about. Is yeah, I mean, we can produce and that's the thing is the technology is advancing
Mm-hmm.
rapidly
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of money behind it and getting put forward, and especially as the climate crisis moves on, as we have, or the climate war, as some people like to call it. It's
Mm-hmm.
gonna be interesting to see if any more money gets thrown at this as a solution. Hmm.
I feel like it
And so
might,
yeah,
because I
and
mean,
so
you're sorry, go
mhm.
ahead.
Yeah, and so what I was thinking is, where exactly do you see any easy solution or easy switch off point for cattle farmers to switch off to another livestock that is a little more insulated?
I mean, it's difficult to say right now just because of how new the technology is. It's hard to gauge because, like you said, I mean, it's evolving and it's
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
constantly getting,
Exactly,
it's evolving
exactly.
at an exponential rate too.
Yeah, and so
That's
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, no, you're good. That's kind of that's the important thing to keep in mind here is that, yeah, like it's super expensive and it's super hard to produce right now, but next year they could develop, or like you said, it could be a week from now they could develop the breakthrough to let them do it, not just better but faster too, and like within like a few weeks they could find out a way to, like, oh well, now we can produce as much meat, as we could get from one steer in, for half the price and in half the time. And so like that kind of stuff, is as they evolve the technology for it, I think that the competitive nature of it, and I think that the risk for the beef, ranchers is going to increase. So the rate at which I think it's going to be evolving is hard to determine right now. But I think that it just, and this is a conversation I've been having lately anyways. I think that in, combination with the new technology in terms of like the meat production, but also in combination with the urban sprawl that's been happening, the amount of farmland that's being torn down for urban development, and for the
Hmm.
amount of land that's being, like with the animal rights activists and with the environmentalists and all that kind of stuff, the amount of land that's being bought out and being converted, either to natural land or back to urban land, just to try to mitigate as much animal agriculture as possible. It's not a bad idea for animal agriculturalists to try to look for alternative methods, and what those alternative methods might be. It's hard to say because I don't know. Right now, is lab grown meat, is it just beef, or how much of it, how many different types of products can we do here?
Well, I mean, if we can, I know that the food company Just is working on chicken
Okay.
and cattle, and I believe they're also working on fish and perhaps pork.
Hmm.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, even if we just go and so I say that why don't we ask this question specifically? Let's say, all right, we know that the that lab grown meat that they have completely replaced the cattle.
Hmm.
This is a hypothetical. They have hypothetically completely replaced cattle production. Like the lab grown meat is cheaper, faster, easier, higher quality cuts.
Hmm.
Where does the cattle rancher go? How does he make his dime?
Okay, that's a good hypothetical to go off of, and it kind of follows the same path as, so like I've been talking to an old mentor of mine about urban sprawl and that kind of thing, and when I was learning how to speak, he used to ask me, okay, so if a farmer gets offered, enough money that could last him, his next generation, and his next generation for his farm, it's going to get turned into a Walmart. Does he take it? The farmer wants to say no because he doesn't want to get rid of his land and have that land lost to urban development. But he have enough money to basically sustain his next two generations, and that most farmers are moral people. They're not going to take, they're going to take the deal that's going to benefit their family before the one's going to benefit their farm. I
Yeah, and there
think
is that deep connection to land. which is
Right.
something I know about. I come from the South, so
Oh yeah.
we're big on our heritage down here.
Right. And
Not the one thing that happened back in 1860s, but anyways, yeah, the
yeah.
other type of heritage, like my great granddaddy, he built this house with his buddies, and these are the quilts these quilts are 200 years old that have been
Wow.
passed down in the family. That sort of stuff, is common down here in the South, and so we care a lot about our land, especially like, that's our land.
Right. No, exactly.
Exactly. So I
So
definitely understand what you're talking about there when you talk about they're reluctant to do so.
yeah.
It's not something, and that's one thing that, like, I guess, in the city it kind of seems different.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to speak blanketly like every city person thinks like this, but I will say that, yeah, land over there is, oh, we have an acre of land, we have this huge backyard, but we
Mhm.
may move over to Los Angeles tomorrow.
Mhm.
If you're a farmer who grew up in Kentucky, and you've been here for the past 8 generations, and you've got 100 acres, you are in Kentucky with your 100 acres. That's where you belong.
Right.
That's where you feel, that's where you're attached to. That ground has been worked for as long as you've been alive and longer.
Yeah. I mean, I come from Central California, which most people don't tend to think about as agricultural land, but
Oh, that's our food basket right there.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So, I grew up in, I don't know if you've ever heard Tulare, but that's where the World Egg
I have
Expo
not.
is held. It's the dairy capital of the world. So, I mean, I didn't even grow up on a farm. I just grew up around, dairies and around agriculture, and like with my family being involved with, farming families and that kind of stuff. So, and I don't even want to leave my hometown. I mean, it's just, it's not even that I own it. It's just that I grew up around land where all of the connections here are so deep, and all of like the bloodlines of just the relationships between my family and the farming families is so deep that I don't even want to leave that. So it just
Yeah,
kind of shows the
yeah.
level of connection there. Um,
Hmm.
but
And like I said, and we're not saying that people from the city are just these heartless people. No, we're just
right.
saying this is what we've experienced.
Right. No, exactly. Like people from, people that didn't grow up around this kind of stuff are they don't have an emotional tie to it because it's not their life.
Hmm.
It's just, it's just different for them. And that's not a bad thing. It's just not, they
Hmm.
just don't understand, where we're coming from.
Yeah.
But the reason I bring up that question of, would the farmer sell his land is because it's a similar one to this
Hmm.
conversation. If, if animal agriculture is completely replaced by this technology,
Hmm.
if the farmer is offered the you know
Hmm.
the like dream of his, like the amount of money of his dreams that could sustain all of the generations that he needs to sustain in exchange for his
Hmm.
land, it's a difficult thing to do, but I think that
Yeah.
eventually they'll take that deal. And I don't think that necessarily that beef rancher is going to have to worry about it because he can retire. I think that the people are going to have to worry about it are the people who want to get into it young, the new
Yeah.
generation coming.
Or the people whose land isn't valuable yet.
Right. Exactly.
And that's one thing. There's people with these hundreds of acres, out in Texas or the Great Plains, or anywhere where they have these huge cattle lands that cannot support agriculture.
Hmm.
There's this talk of, we'll just switch over to producing, more, more corn and soy. That's not always an option for this land. And if it's not in the right location and developers don't want it, it's not going to give them that money. And even then, if there is this big push, because it becomes unprofitable to produce cattle in the meat industry anymore,
Hmm.
then we're not going to see these 3 generation revenue packages that are going to be flopped out there. They're gonna start paying. They're gonna start lowballing everybody because they know it doesn't matter.
Right.
If one farmer won't sell, he'll go to the other one because everybody's getting out of the biz.
Right. And I think what's going to end up happening, let's just assume that this eventually does replace animal agriculture. I think that this is going to be rough for the transitionary period. Anyone who's wanting to get into agriculture around the time that this is happening. But I think after maybe a generation or two, the
Mm-hmm.
new question is going to be, it's not necessarily going to be like, oh, well, now animal agriculture is gone, so we're all just done with farming. I think it's
Yeah,
going to
well, no.
be
What about sheep?
right. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And that is one question I do have. I'm not so concerned about. I don't know if you know about this, but what is the potentiality of switching over from producing cattle to producing sheep?
It is a rough transition. I know that. It's it depends on your land. It depends on what you have available in terms of resource. Because
I didn't
sheep.
know how different intensive they required.
Yeah, I mean they have very similar digestive systems, but you can't necessarily feed them the same. Or well, I guess it depends on your operation. You can if you're feeding them out for for meat production, but if you're using them as grazers or if you're using them for wool, it's a bit of a different type of operation. Because at that point you're feeding them out for longevity. You're not necessarily feeding them out to fatten up and then sell them off to market. So it would depend on your operation. It depends on what resources you have available. My question is, and this can go to the sheep thing, too, but also to the cattle. If it came to the point where cattle were no longer used for commercial production, how would that change the feed industry? All of the byproducts they're used by cattle after slaughter, because we don't just use their meat, we use their hooves, their horns, we use some of their intestines for different things. Like not all of their entire body isn't just used for meat. There's different purposes for it, and that's why we couldn't. We might be able to eventually produce mutton using this technology, but would we replace sheep entirely with that? I don't think so.
Exactly. And so this is part of my background. Like, so I do economics. And so one thing that we're going to say is who's paying.
Right.
And who's paying the bulk. I mean, when we sell animal products, and yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, a lot of people like to think a cow is the meat or the milk or and those products, but there is hundreds of byproducts we pull from every animal at slaughter because farmers need every dime they can get. And so what we're going to see is the price of leather.
Yep.
And the price of every other chemical, if there's not a profitable solution, or a profitable solution, because that could be the thing. Once we start seeing these high prices, it may only be a couple months before we get these chemists out there who say, guess what I came up with in the lab.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be out there. So it's going to be a transitionary period.
Right.
And I think that's something that we're starting to accept more and more as time goes on. It's no longer, oh, look at that weird, quirky idea that's never going to turn out to be something. It's, is that mine or the next generation's problem?
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. It's, it's no longer, oh yeah, that's just, you keep talking on a street corner, man. It's like, do I need to have a backup plan for this? Is this something that this is going to potentially hurt my entire livelihood? It's something that farmers are having to worry about now, like the newer technology. But my question is, because I've always been an advocate for the idea of, we just need to have a sufficient source of food. I'm all for preserving agriculture in any way possible, but as we've seen, and I've had this conversation in the past, people are worried about automizing agriculture because it gets rid of jobs. The job market adapts. People who didn't have a job because new technology replaced it will find a new job with the new technology.
And that's a question we could think about here. But yeah, definitely, I see what you're talking about in terms of food.
Right.
Well, when we consider so meat is a very expensive food product. I mean, people want to claim that if you go vegan, then you're going to pay a lot more. Yeah, if you're out there buying the super organic and healthy stuff, but most of the time we're paying dollars per pound for beef and everything, and so we have this consumption, and so I think that could be a wonderful thing in terms of everyone's real income, and so we're gonna we won't see wages rise necessarily, but when you go to the grocery store, meat might be the cheapest thing, because if these factories can produce it, then it's not going to matter, and if factories can start ramming this out, we think about like a brewery. And that's kind of the system they're using right now with the bacteria. And so if they just build these huge breweries everywhere, because it doesn't matter, you can grow it now. You could build a huge factory just outside of New York, ship it in there by truck in the morning. You've got no transport cost. You've got very little land cost. You've got very little feed. You've got very little everything. The only thing you're paying is for, just running this factory here that is super efficient. The cost we're going to see, it could really help people out in terms of purchasing this food. And then especially abroad, we could start, shipping just huge amounts of this abroad into these poor communities. We might be saying, here's your rice, here's your T-bone steak, or would you prefer a porterhouse?
Right. No, exactly. I mean, we're starting to notice that agriculture and this kind of goes back into the point I was making about, new jobs being created from this. We're starting to see agriculture evolve into more of a scientifically based, which it's always been science based, but it's more of it's ever growing. It's more and more science based as we evolve as an industry. And I think
Mhm.
that as we talk about, like, we're
A
worried
lot
about
more chemistry, a lot less biology.
exactly. And so like
Mhm.
as we get into the idea of, like, because this was even a conversation back when they started putting like GPSs into tractors and using like artificial intelligence and the drones and that kind of stuff. When
Mhm.
that became the question, people were like, "Oh, well, that's going to get rid of a lot of jobs." No, it created a new demand for people who get trained in those areas and are able to use that technology. I think as we see that happen with with this new technology, as people lose their potential jobs that they would have had on the beef ranch, there's now a new demand for younger generations to get involved in the technology associated with producing this meat at a faster and more efficient level, and that
Yeah.
could ultimately be a good thing for the economy. It's just going to be a shift in in the job market, but it's not going to be
Yeah.
necessarily a loss of job. It's just it might be a loss of jobs for the older generations, but as we talked about, they may even benefit from selling out their ranches.
Yeah, and that's one thing that like I said, is really hard to answer an economic situation.
Right.
I mean, you're right in terms of like there's going to be new jobs opening up, but there may not be more jobs. And one thing we're not
Mhm.
talking about is if they're going to be locating their factories, they're not going to be locating their factories in the same places these cattle places are. They're going
Right.
to be locating them in the outskirts of cities
Mhm.
because that's where they can get these super cheap shipping costs. And so I'm worried necessarily about a more hollowing out of our rural communities. I mean,
Mhm.
we already know that our rural communities are struggling to
Right.
get by with jobs or anything. I mean, we have everything from a doctor shortage to food deserts, as they're called.
Mhm.
And, just because we lack, we don't have enough density to be profitable. And
Mhm.
so I wonder what's going to happen with a lot of these farms that aren't able to convert if just these farmers start going away. And then, farmer stops going there. He stops buying his, a couple hundred gallons of diesel
Right.
that he needs, and so that gas station, then they close their doors, and then that diner closes its doors, and then it's this knock-on effect, and then all of a sudden we've got this rampant just closing down of our rural towns and cities as people then have to shift and move out. It'd
Mhm.
be like the a technological dust bowl in sort
Right.
of a way.
Yeah, no, and I'm fearful for the same thing, and I have been for a while. It's actually why I started my show in the first place. People come on here all the time and ask me like what's the point in talking about this kind of stuff, and I always explain like we may never run out of food, and I'm pretty sure we won't ever run out of food, but we may run
Yeah.
out of the people who are growing it, and that's the thing that I'm worried about.
Yeah, if you
Preserving.
look at if you look at the amount of people in agriculture through time, it's gone down.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's always gone down. It used to be 99% of labor. Now and then it's just going down further and further and further.
Yeah, in terms of Americans involved in actual food production, not just research or technology, but actual food production, it's less than 2% of
Yeah.
Americans. Like it's a minuscule amount of Americans are growing our food, which I mean it's great that they're able to do that sustainably and still keep still keep money in their pocket. But how much longer are they able to do that? And that's kind of the scary part is can we
Hmm.
maintain and preserve that same lifestyle and not lose it completely?
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, as we have these big companies, and that's another issue, when we talk about like, even like the standard, that, the crop growers,
Hmm.
they don't like local crop growers don't get the subsidies like the big farms do.
Right.
And these big multinational farms that own these thousands and thousands of acres, they're the ones getting their pockets lined with Washington's dollars.
Right. Yeah. No, it's insane.
Yeah, and so the local farmers are always the ones getting screwed out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's going to be interesting to see, and I know there's always this talk of, and I think this is something that like trends around every so often in agricultural news, the revolution for the new farmer, the
Yeah.
new generation of farmer who's going to rise up and does it. And then like they point to one guy who made a garden in his backyard and sells it to like the most upscale restaurants in town.
Right.
Yeah, he made it, but that's not like we're not going to see these micro farms popping up in Kansas.
No.
It's just not it's just not here. Like where I come from, we don't have a premier
Right.
dining experience. We can drive 30 minutes to the Red Lobster if you want something fancy. Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I've seen something. There's a lot of talk and conversation, especially in the environmental groups right now, about the potential of you know fusing agriculture with urban life again and having like there's something called the Pegasus project, which would put a 100-acre farm right smack dab in the middle of Chicago. Stuff like that, trying to integrate agriculture into urban developments, that way we don't lose that entirely. But it's still going to be different. It's not going to be rural life like we know it. It's just going to be exposure to the practice. And I'm not sure that that'll ever accurately replace agriculture, because I don't think it's sustainable to the degree it's going to be able to produce enough food to feed what it's going to have to feed. But maybe
think about the cost per acre,
right,
of that land.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just not economical. Center City land is the most expensive land you're going to get.
Right.
And so unless this is like city owned or something else to prevent that, because there's going to be this jockeying all day long of trying to get that land switched over to commercial or residential use, just because that's where the money is. And so I don't think that we need farms in cities. It's a nice concept, but I think honestly it sounds and looks better than it actually is. I don't think it actually makes that much a difference if you walk past a farm or not, because I'm close to soybeans. I don't think that makes me a better person.
Yeah, no, I think that the primary purpose of it is for education, try to get people exposed to not only just agriculture and what it's doing, but also try to get them acquainted with the science and show them like the depth to which their food is grown. So it's more of an educational tool.
Yeah, I heard a thing. There was a study, and this may be completely wrong, but I heard like 40% of British children thought eggs came from plants.
What?
That's what I heard.
Oh, jeez.
Well, honestly, I mean, really, it's if you've never grown up and if you've never been taught it, like I had agriculture in my school. Like we had agriculture in middle school, but even then I knew that eggs came from that. And a lot of people don't know the difference between brown and white eggs.
Right. Yeah. No, that's something that I run into a lot. Or I have people here that there are people who grew up in my hometown, where we can't turn a corner without seeing or smelling a dairy, and they think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing. I did have one more kind of hypothetical question for you before we close out here.
All right, sounds good. I'll see what I can do.
Okay. So let's just say, same, lab grown meat hypothetical where everything is entirely converted to, they're just producing lab grown meat. And it's kind of is a two-part question. So first of all, if we're able to do it, because you said that it's almost like they're vaccinating the calf. You just, take a shot and then you take the cells and then you make the meat from it. What's that going to look like on the animal level? Like, are they just going to have very, very, very small operations built entirely around just keeping the animals happy and stress-free, and then they get their shot for the day and then they make meat off of it? Or like, what are we going to look at in terms of operation style? And two, what are we going to look at in terms of commercial competition? Like, are there going to be individual companies doing this? Or are they going to have like sole enterprises, kind of like the farmers are going to adapt this kind of technology for themselves? Or is it going to be just like large corporation kind of stuff running this?
Okay, so let me start off with your third one first.
Okay.
All right, so when we talk about what's going to happen in terms of this is, so we need to look at what we have right now. And right now we have what we call disruptors. Memphis Meats, Just Eats, I believe is the name of the company. It could be Eats Just, I forget the exact. And there are these little disruptor companies that have popped up that are vying and jockeying for this. Now, what's going to determine how they compete with each other is entirely the patent laws.
Okay.
The patent, the copyright, the trademark, however the intellectual property is controlled is going to change this. And so that's what's going to be there. If Just is able to get it to where they have complete and total patent over how they grow their lab grown meats, and they're a year or 2 months even ahead of these other companies, we're going to see one megalith with a whole lot of smaller companies. They're going to have to really work really hard to make their meat cheaper and faster and other such things. And there is going to be this huge competition before it becomes a monopoly. In terms of, it's a natural monopoly. It's not like they're going to take over. They're just going to be the only one.
Right.
And this really depends upon patent law. And if anybody's thinking, well, that's ridiculous, you can't just have a company sprout up out of thin air. So back in 2000, what was Facebook? What was Twitter? What was Facebook? What was Twitter? What was Snapchat? What was Instagram? What was all of that again? I forgot.
Right.
Elon Musk. Isn't that weird how you just heard his name?
Right.
Yeah. So this is something that we're seeing now in this age. if people have the technology and they make something happen that other people didn't get their boots on the ground and they got the technology to adapt it, then yeah, these megaliths are going to happen here. We could start saying, well, that's just the new one. That's just what it is. Uber, Lyft, and Just Just Chicken. That's what it is. And so, in terms of that question, now we see your other one was in terms, what are we going to see for the animals?
Like the size of operation, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so this really depends upon how the technology is working. They're working really, really hard to get it to where they can infinitely replicate these pluripotent stem cells. So what they could do in this situation is they would just take a few hundred samples from various breeds of cattle, and just they would have this massive DNA catalog, and then they wouldn't need to ever worry about cattle again, because they would have their data, and they could just preserve that. And then if they were worried about it going bad, they could just produce more and then hold that back. And so they wouldn't have to worry about cattle operations. If that's not the case, what we might see is a central location where they have, or sort of like there's all these little bottlers for Coca-Cola. Like there is Coca-Cola headquarters, and then all the little bottlers produce it. And so we could have Coca-Cola headquarters where they produce the chemical, and they have this small population of really well kept animals, and then they ship out the chemicals all over. And we could see that as sort of that process, because this is a weight gaining industry,
right?
And that's something we could deal with. And I seem to have forgotten your second question.
That was about it. It was just how are companies going to remain competitive, or is there going to be a competition among the companies? And
how
our operations going to stay small?
Yeah, I don't think the farmers are going to be the ones that are able to rise up and take this over.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Not because farmers are stupid, but because farmers are ill trained in the situation.
Right.
There's going to have to be finding a new way to use the land. I don't know what that is. I suggested maybe sheep, because wool is going to be a thing, and other animals, sheep, llama, that sort of thing.
I was going to say, in regards to that idea, wouldn't dairy still remain prevalent then? Because they can't artificially produce milk yet, can they?
Exactly. Dairy would still remain a thing until they start artificially producing milk.
Yeah,
because and that's one thing that we need to talk about. Dairy is going to get more expensive because they use all the calves. They sell it off for veal, or they sell it off to feedlots or whatever it is. And so dairy is going to get more expensive, because who's paying is going to change. You might go to the store and butter may be $1 more expensive, but the meat's down $1. And so it'll shift in terms of consumer purchasing. It may be the same, it may not, just depending on how it transfers. But yeah, we're going to see this as an issue. Now, is everyone going to switch over to these lab grown meats? Maybe not, but it's kind of going to be like it is nowadays, where if you want the option to buy, non-GMO, you have to pay out the nose. You may have to pay out the nose. And I'm not certain that the working poor in America, or low income, or even lower middle class people are going to look at the price tag and say, well, I had my convictions before, but that's like $20 sitting in my cart right there every week. I'll just try it this one week.
Right.
Yeah. People's wallets have a really good way of talking to them about things and convincing them, hey, instead of that name brand of chip, why don't you buy the great value?
Yep.
And so that's sort of where I see that as being an issue.
Okay. So in terms of final thoughts on the bee issue, on the lab grown meat issue, in terms of not necessarily the issue, but in terms of the future of these two particular topics, do you have anything else you want to close out with?
I guess just the main thing is, we live in very interesting times in agriculture, but we don't know when. If we could agree on a message to give people as we close out this podcast, the future is coming, but it's kind of like waiting for the bus.
Right.
Sometimes it shows up when we expect it to. Sometimes it's 15 minutes early, and sometimes it's 3 hours late.
Yep.
All right.
I like that. And so as far as my final thoughts go, I'd say, I agree completely. It's just something we're going to have to kind of wait and see. There's really no way to surefire predict how things are going to go. We're just going to have to kind of ride the waters as they come to us. I will say, we had a similar conversation, or I didn't, but people had a similar conversation about lab grown meat that they had about organic farming and newer like holistic agriculture and that kind of stuff. So I think that it will become a niche part of the market, but will it replace modern agriculture? I don't see it happening for another decade or two, but who knows? Technology evolves quickly, so I guess we'll have to kind of wait and see. But yeah, so I think that kind of wraps up our conversation. I will give you the chance to plug your podcast if you'd like and talk about anything else you'd like to plug.
Yeah, like I said, in case anybody's interested, I am going to have my first episode of the Utopic Socialist this Wednesday. You can find it on Spotify early that day. Apple takes a little bit later. And if you're interested in following me on social media, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Proto-Socialist.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again, KT, for coming on. It's been a sure pleasure and a lot of fun having this conversation about hypotheticals and stuff. It's always a good time. I think we got some new memes out of this episode, so I might have to make a t-shirt about BEE-lieve being on fire. But awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again so much for coming on the show. Thanks to all my listeners and supporters for tuning in and always helping out the podcast. So I think that'll do it. So don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.